In nature, nothing is created, nothing is lost. Everything changes, once said French chemist Antoine Lavoisier. The molecules and cells that make up our bodies evidently arose from those of our parents, but what about our personality? What was our mind or consciousness prior to conception? Did it magically appear out of the blue, with all its distinctive peculiarities during pregnancy, contradicting both Lavoisier and the principle of mass-energy equivalence? In this episode of Do You Mind, we once again defy the common assumption that mental processes arise from brain activity, by analyzing mental and physiological phenomena, suggesting that the mind may, in fact, pre-exist our very own conception. As we have extensively shown in previous episodes, the factual evidence supporting the view on the mind as a product of the brain is not as solid as one would expect from such an overwhelmingly accepted theory. If the principle stating that nothing is created is true, then, of what nature or essence was the mind made of, prior to conception? Researchers like Humberto Maturana suggested that self-consciousness does not have an objective existence per se. Should we therefore conclude that thoughts, memories and dreams do not actually exist? To put it differently, perhaps we need a new definition for existence. Since the early days of modern science, it has been firmly believed that attributes such as personality, tastes, preferences, and tendencies seen in infants are spontaneously created in the womb, and are largely attributed to genetics. Deeply entrenched in the materialistic rationale pervading science since the 18th century, such an assumption is equally convenient for certain creationist doctrines and religions, for they often postulate that both body and soul are created simultaneously. A variety of mental and physiological phenomena can provide insights into a possible pre-existence of our individuality, a fascinating topic that remains largely and conveniently ignored within the sciences of the mind. To better understand the current, science-based concept of innate knowledge, we must first go back to ancient times. Animus?
Thank you, Anima. The earliest known concept of innate or inborn knowledge can be found in Plato's Meno, a Socratic dialogue that is believed to have been written between 400 to 380 BC. In this narrative, Socrates talks to Meno's slave, who has no prior understanding of geometry. Through careful questioning, Socrates leads him to prove the Pythagorean theorem, a piece of knowledge that he could not have previously acquired. Socrates concluded that we do not truly learn anything new, but rather have recollections of prior knowledge. His views were shared by 16th century philosopher René Descartes, who argued that much of our knowledge is innate, but that it only manifests later in life. According to Socrates, this also included diseases, many of which were accurately regarded as latent at birth, only to arise later in life, and thus paving the way for present-day research on predispositions to certain diseases that are non-hereditary. 17th century German mathematician and philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz also believed in certain innate ideas, such as mathematical truisms, like 1 + 1 = 2, which evidently holds true without the need for empirical evidence. Meanwhile, empiricist John Locke argued that the mind is devoid of all knowledge or ideas at birth, and that these are only acquired through the experience of the senses, a theory known as tabula rasa or blank slate. In today's views, all knowledge is understood to be acquired through experience. Nevertheless, a small yet significant variety of innate ideas and abilities seem to contradict such an assumption. For American linguist, philosopher, and cognitive scientist Noam Chomsky, innate knowledge is demonstrated by the mind-boggling ability of very young children in implementing generative grammar in language learning, that is, to carry out conceptually complex operations that define the structure of any language. Another related finding supporting the innate knowledge hypothesis: these learners acquire syntactic knowledge, for which there is very little or no decisive evidence from the environment. The Blue Brain Project, an ongoing research initiative from the Brain and Mind Institute of École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in Switzerland, is responsible for the fascinating, biologically detailed, digital reconstructions and simulations of the mouse brain. Among the various results yielded by this research, neuroscientists have discovered that neurons transmit signals despite an individual's experience, contradicting both Locke's tabula rasa theory and the assumption that neuronal circuits only arise when sensorial experiences and memories are imprinted in the brain. As one would expect, such innate building blocks of knowledge are hastily attributed to genetics, not because a correlation has been demonstrated, but because the mainstream and reductionist view on the mind does not allow for an alternative explanation. This leads us to another assumption in cognitive neuroscience, which claims that innate knowledge in mammals is genetically inherited. Such a hypothesis states that horses automatically know how to walk from birth, yet falls short of explaining how this could occur. How can a living being automatically know without prior knowledge? If, as it is believed, some knowledge is hereditary, why don't we see children, rudimentarily hardwired with their parents' mental abilities or motor skills? How can parents with below-average intelligence give birth to a genius? And reversely, how can brilliant parents give birth to a child with abysmal mental abilities? Genome-wide association studies, which are mostly used to identify genes involved in diseases, have also been used to determine if certain areas of the genome are associated with intelligence or IQ. These studies were unable to conclusively identify any genes that would have major roles in differences in intelligence. Although both environmental and genetic factors seemingly play a part in determining intelligence, significant aspects of this question remain unaccounted for.
History is replete with accounts of child prodigies or geniuses, who inexplicably present remarkable mental abilities, intelligence or skills in a variety of academic or artistic fields. Notable classic examples include Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, who did not have a formal education but a voracious appetite for knowledge. She could read at age 3, mastered the Latin language after 20 lessons, and presented extraordinary intellectual capacity. At age 17, here depicted in the 2016 TV miniseries Juana Inés, she had her abilities tested by a panel of 40 university professors, all of whom were astonished by her deep knowledge of philosophy, mathematics, and history. She went on to become a nun, and one of the 17th century's most popular authors of drama, poetry, and prose. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart could faultlessly play the piano with the greatest delicacy at the age of 3, was actively touring at 6, composed his first symphony at age 9, and his first operas at age 14. Marie Curie exhibited extraordinary skills as young as 4, when she taught herself to read both French and Russian. She was also capable of recalling vivid events from her toddler years. She went on to become the first female to win a Nobel Prize, and the only to win the award in 2 separate fields. Bobby Fischer was competing against America's best chess players at age 12, and became a grandmaster at 15. More recent examples include 6-month-old Michael Carney, who said to his pediatrician, "I have a left ear infection." He could read at the age of 10 months, and was the world's youngest college graduate with a bachelor's degree in anthropology at 10 years old. Many more examples from the 20th century alone could be cited here, but important questions would still remain unanswered. Where do such exceptional abilities come from? The brain. Can exceptional abilities be factually correlated to the brain? It seems they cannot. The brain of one of the most brilliant men to ever walk the face of the earth, Albert Einstein, has been the object of intense speculations and investigations over the years. Much to the dismay of enthusiastic researchers, who had expected to find a powerful and unique engine under the hood, Einstein's brain was surprisingly common. Very few anomalies were observed, and it remains impossible to map these anatomical differences to Einstein's genius with any certainty. A publication bias reported by Colombo et al. Led to most papers showing anatomical differences being published, while those who did not were ignored. Do we not see here wishful thinking on the part of reductionists and physicalists, distorting data to support their worldview and consequent assumptions on the nature of the mind? This brings us to another piece of evidence against a purely neurological mental causation, when infants are born without a brain. Aaron Murray was born in 2013 with only a brain stem, and the rest of the brain completely missing, a condition called hydranencephaly, where the brain is unformed or partially developed. Contrary to most infants with this condition, Aaron did not die before or shortly after birth, and went on to live for 4 years, giggling, smiling, and actually repeating simple words like mummy. How can awareness, consciousness, cognition, basic speech, and even interaction occur in a child who, according to the conventional view on the mind, should find himself in an entirely vegetative state? The single repetition of a sound requires a minimal level of consciousness, audition, the faculty of memory, and finally, rudimentary language. A hypothesis proposed to explain this anomaly claims that all brain functions would have unbelievably been rewired into the brain stem through neuroplasticity. Such an extraordinary claim has never been demonstrated on such a scale, and cannot account for the awareness and cognition observed in rare but fully documented cases like Aaron Murray. Arguably, if the brain stem can rewire functions that are normally attributed to the left hemisphere, then one may logically ask, why do we need a left hemisphere in the first place? Why do animals have a left hemisphere, if consciousness and rudimentary auditory communication can be rewired to the brain stem? More importantly, where did Aaron's tastes, preferences and personality traits come from? Do we not see here an individuality manifesting without a brain? As we have extensively seen in the first and second episodes of Do You Mind?, the seemingly logical interpretation of the mind as a product or emergent property of the brain is not supported by factual evidence. There is no consensus on what the mind is, and no consensus on how and why should it arise from neuronal activity. All we have are correlations between neurological and mental phenomena, which cannot be considered factual demonstrations of causation. Thus, with the cognition and awareness seen in infants born without a brain, it becomes rational to question whether such a hypothesis is accurate. A reversal of the causation mechanism from brain-mind to mind-brain may prove to be the key to explaining the wide variety of uncommon mental phenomena presented so far in this series. The brain, which is firmly believed to be fundamental by most researchers, may, in fact, be derivative from a purely mental cause. The question to ponder here is, were Aaron's mental faculties absent or limited due to insufficient physiological support? Or did Aaron have a fully developed mind, whose interactions with the physical world were hindered by underdeveloped instrumentation? This controversial condition represents a considerable challenge to the mainstream interpretation of the mind as a product of the brain, which is largely presented as a fact in academic literature, more particularly in the fields of cognitive neuroscience and biomedicine. What if we are not born as a tabula rasa or a blank slate? Could our individuality have had a form of existence prior to this life? Could we have all lived before? A growing body of research and clinical data from both young and adult subjects seem to corroborate such a hypothesis. Children remembering past lives have been the object of several research projects and much interest from the general public since the 1960s. Although accounts are numerous and coherent in nature, most researchers logically question whether any compelling data can be obtained from such anecdotal evidence. In the face of such an extraordinary claim, we shall thus take a skeptical stance and acknowledge that the majority of claims of past lives could be the result of prior knowledge, high suggestibility and fantasy proneness in children. That still leaves us with a small but significant number of accounts that cannot, due to their content and circumstances, be attributed to the aforementioned causes. These include cases in which alleged past lives memories and information can be independently verified. Because this topic has already been extensively covered in a variety of studies and documentaries, we shall only present a few cases that provided verifiable information that could not have been obtained by normal means, suggesting that the psyche may, in fact, pre-exist not only birth, but also conception. Atlas Auberry had been having terrifying nightmares since he was a year and a half old, where he would scream with his eyes wide open, as if he was being attacked. His mother sought professional help, but local doctors could not explain such recurring events. At 4 years old, Atlas spontaneously started talking about his other family, when his name was allegedly Jalen Robinson. He claimed he would have been killed by a babysitter under very specific circumstances. Searching records of past murders, his mother found a report matching her son's memories and went on to contact Dr. Jim Tucker from the University of Virginia, who had been investigating cases of past lives memories in children. He interviewed Atlas, who was able to correctly identify 5 photos from Jalen's life, including the faces of Jalen's parents, their home, and several places the family would visit. How could Atlas possibly gather such specific information, if Jalen's murder had barely made the news? Unlike most cases of past lives memories, the specificity and accuracy of Atlas' account cannot be explained by conventional means. Previous cases of children remembering past lives offering verifiable information were reported by psychiatrist Ian Stevenson. In 1951, 3-year-old Indian girl Svinalata Mishra was traveling 100 miles from home when she asked the truck driver to turn to the road to my home. According to her account, she would have lived in that distant town as a Bengali woman named B.R. Pathak, who was married, had 2 sons and would have died in 1939 of pain in her throat, all details that were later confirmed. Interviewed by Professor Sri Banerjee at age 10, she provided enough information to allow him to locate her other home. Her current and alleged past families had never heard of each other before she spoke of her life as B.R. Pathak. In a surprise visit to her current home, her husband and 2 sons showed up along with 9 other complete strangers. She immediately identified her previous husband and 2 sons, using nicknames instead of their formal names. The researcher and her current family tried to mislead her several times in order to further validate the accuracy of her memories. She even reminded her husband of an exact sum of money he would have stolen from her secret box, a piece of information no one knew about except BR and her husband. Numerous cases that remain unexplained within the conventional view on the mind could be presented here, but for the sake of brevity, we shall move on to relevant questions. If the mind pre-exists birth and survives death, then why are past lives memories mostly found in young children? Why do memories tend to vanish when they reach teenage or adulthood? And finally, by what means can a person tap into verifiable knowledge they could not have acquired? Animus.
We shall summarily hypothesize that the mind or consciousness may be an independent, non-local or quantum-like process, that much like its biological counterpart, would be the product of evolution, operating in parallel to living organisms, but on an exponentially longer timescale. The mind being more closely intertwined with organic processes during teenage and adulthood could impede or hinder access to certain non-local mental content, and thus explain the anomalies observed in children, the elderly, or the dying. Such a hypothesis is very much in line with the works of James Lake, and of Ian Stevenson, who after many decades of research on past lives memories, insightfully stated, "Reincarnation, at least as I conceive it, does not nullify what we know about evolution and genetics." It suggests, however, that there may be two streams of evolution, the biological one, and a personal one, and that during terrestrial lives, these streams may interact. In the next episode, we analyze a hypothesis for evolutionary bioidealism, which was introduced by French psychical researcher Gabriel Delanne in 1897, under the name of évolution animique, which was further developed by Brazilian physician André Luiz, in the 1940s. Such a daring hypothesis may possibly be the missing link, the misunderstood mechanism that could explain nearly all uncommon phenomena presented so far in this series. All this, and much more, on Do You Mind?